Okay, good morning, everyone. It is a great salute for me to introduce our newest addition to our lineup here at the OUisrael Center, and that is my illustrious and distinguished father-in-law, Rabbi Moshe Snow. Rabbi Moshe Snow, of course, for many decades was a leading rabbinic personality in the Brooklyn, New York area, as well as a longtime beloved faculty member at the JEC Yeshiva in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And it's a great chus to introduce and welcome Rabbi Snow to our lineup here. And you're in for a treat. Rabbi Snow has been teaching Pirkei Avot in depth, I won't say for how many years. And we're delighted to add that special class to our lineup here on Tuesday morning. So without further ado, Rabbi Moshe Snow.
If I may ask everybody, just please turn their phones on to silent for the duration of the shiur. Thank you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nהיה b'dvaro. Amen. Baruchim habayim, everyone. This is the first for me. It's the first time I'm giving the Pirkei Avot shiur, not in my shul, but here in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim, HaKodesh. And thank you all for coming. And Baruchim habayim. Let's hope that it's worthwhile. Rabbi Shor's introduction was played down because I told him just the fact that you're my son-in-law doesn't give you the right to exaggerate. We're about to embark on a study of one of the most famous, you might say, tractates or Sfarim in Chazal's lexicon of Sfarim, Pirkei Avos. Pirkei Avos means chapters of the fathers, but it's been translated generally over all the years as ethics of the fathers, or the teachings of the fathers. And that's because there's a reason for this name. Interestingly enough, Pirkei Avos is part of Shas, but it appears in the section of Nezikin. For those of you who know, there are 6 orders of the Mishnah, spelling 2 words that Chazal have pointed out over the time, Zman Nokat. Zman Nokat literally means choose the time. And it's an acronym for Zroim, Moed, Noshim, Nezikim, Kodshim, and Taharos. So Ethics of the Fathers, or Pirkei Avos, appears at the very end of Nezikin. Nezikin has to do with damages. We're just in the Daf Yomi starting Bava Metzia. We just finished Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, and Bava Basra, according to many interpretations, encapsulated one section of Nezikin, of damages. And the Jewish people have this very big concern about being careful of others' property, others' body, others' ownership, to the point where when you start learning in Bava Metzia, the first Mishnah, Shnayim Ochzim B'talis. 2 people are holding on to a garment, and this one says it's mine, the other one says it's mine, as is well known. And what do? How do you work this out? And the next 10, 15 Blat Gemara deal with small little measures of this one says half is mine, the other one says the other half is mine, and so on and so forth. And they want to avoid difficulty. I want to do the right thing and divide everything up in the most proper way. So we have damages and discussions about everyday objects and things. And if someone entrusts someone with someone else's property and so on, and at the end of the Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, Bava Basra, and then you go to Shavuos, people who take oaths and swears, Masechta Sanhedrin, the laws of the Sanhedrin, and so on. At the end of all this, comes Pirkei Avos. And Pirkei Avos is the end of Nezikin because of the fact that the Jewish people are so concerned about others' property and others' wealth and others' being. We have to know how to deal with that. And there are ethical values attached to this. Is it right to do something or is it not right to do something? This is something that even the nations of the world, as is pointed out by the Rambam in his introduction to Pirkei Avos, says that the nations of the world also have values. They also have ethical values. But they're constantly in flux and they're never empirical and long-lasting. They change with the times. What's acceptable today was not acceptable yesterday, and hopefully won't be acceptable tomorrow. And as we know, when we look at the society and the declining of moral values and ethical values and what's proper and what's acceptable, we know that, as the Rambam points out, there's one difference between Klal Yisrael, its values, and its ethical teachings and the rest of the world, and that is it never changes. It remains the same because it's divine in its origin. So that's the beginning of the concept that has to do with Pirkei Avos. Now the Rambam in his introduction, actually it's brought down by Rabbi Ovadia Mibatanuri. He quotes the Rambam and he says there are two main reasons why Pirkei Avos is included in the Zikin and why we have to study them. And he says the first reason is, and this is very important, because if you take a look at the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, we see that it says, Moshe kibel Torah misinai, u'misora liYoshua, v'Yoshua l'Zakenim, u'Zakenim misaru l'Anshe Knesses HaGedolah, and Haim Omru Shlosha Devarim, they said three things. So it starts out, Moshe kibel Torah misinai. Moshe received the Torah from Sinai, that's the first Mishnah. U'misara liYoshua, and he gave it over to Yoshua, and the Yoshua to the Nevi'im to the Zakenim, and so on and so forth. And the Rambam says, the first reason is, ha'echad k'dei lahodia sheha'askama v'ha'kabbalah emes u'nechona v'kiblua ame'am. Because our tradition, our masterful tradition of passing it on from generation to generation and people to people is a guarantee of the authenticity of the Torah, because it's in every single generation that they backed up what was said from the previous ones and said this is emes and this is true. Now you could say that, over time, one of the things people often complain about is, well, wait a minute, if you ever play a game telephone, the game starts, you have 15 people in a row, and one whispers something to the second person, and the second person to the third, and the third to the, and when you get to the 15th, it's not the same message that started out at the first. So they say, well, if the Jewish people had this passed on from generation to generation to generation, maybe it got skewered in between, maybe it got messed up, maybe it's not as authentic as it was in the past. There are a lot of people say that when it comes to Torah Shebaal Peh, especially when it comes to the oral law, they say, well, you can tell me the written law is exactly word for word and so on, but when it comes to the oral law, maybe it's not so. So the Rambam points out right away, Lefikach ro'ui lechabed hechacham u'loshiva b'mala nichbeda. You should put him in a high place, b'shvil shehigia ha'hora elav, because it went from generation to generation. It came to the generation, and we know that it's exactly the same as it was from before. How do we know that? How do we know that? So in an introduction to understanding the value of Torah Shebaal Peh, I want to read you a very interesting discussion in the Gemara in Shabbos. The Gemara in Shabbos on Daf Lamed tells three stories about Hillel and Shammai. Everybody's familiar with the second story, right? What was it? A prospective ger, or according to the Mashah, it wasn't really a ger. It was a non-from Jew who wanted to know if, what's being taught is authentic. And he says, teach me the whole Torah. Gaireni al menashe amod al regel lachas. Teach me the whole Torah while I stand on one foot. You're all familiar with this, right? Teach me the Torah while I stand on one foot. So he comes to Shammai, and Shammai, the Gemara says he took the Amas HaBinyan. he took the beam of the building, as the Gemara says at Daf Lamed Amud Aleph. He says he took the Amas Habinyan, he took a beam from the house, and he ripped it out of the ceiling, and he started chasing the person as if he's going to hit him with the Amas Habinyan. Okay, the Maharsha explains really what's going on over here is he was trying to give a message to the person. You see this building? I just took a beam right out of the building. Did the building collapse? It didn't collapse. It shows you that the Torah isn't dependent upon, you're standing on one foot. It's not one thing. There's a whole compendium of things. So we're familiar with that particular story. But I want you to know that the story that comes before that is really even more valuable in terms of understanding the nature of the Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh. The Gemara over here on Daf Lamed Aleph, he brings down. Let me get my reading glasses on over here. See, he brings down the first particular story. 1 second. Also about Hillel and Shammai, and it's also about the Ger, the prospective Ger who wants to learn, the whole Torah while standing on one foot. And he says like this. He says like this. So it's on Lamed Aleph. Okay. He says, it's on Lamed Aleph. I'm sorry. He brings down like this. He says, the first story. Ma'aseh b'nochi echad, Ma'aseh b'nochi echad sheba lefnei Shammai yomalo. He said to him, Kama Toros yesh lachem. How many Torahs do you have? Omalo, he said to him, Shtayim. We have 2 Torahs. What are they? Torah Shebiksav, the Torah Shebal Peh. You have a Torah Shebiksav and Torah Shebal Peh. So Omale, so the Ger said to him, right, Shebiksav ani ma mincha. As far as the Torah Shebiksav is concerned, I believe you, I trust you, I accept it, no problem. V'shebal Peh ani ma mincha. But the Torah Shebal Peh, I don't believe you that that's authentic. It could get skewered over time. I don't believe you that it's authentic, right? So he said to Shammai, Gayareni almanash shetalamdeni Torah Shebiksav. Convert me on condition that you teach me only the Torah Shebiksav. I'll accept it if you teach me the Torah Shebiksav. Garbo v'otzia b'nezifa. So Shammai got a bit angry at him and he threw him out. Goodbye. Bo lefnei Hillel. Oh. Now the Ger, prospective Ger, or prospective Baal Tshuva comes to Hillel, right? And he says to him, Gaireni. And he says, convert me and teach me the right way. And Gaire. He accepted him, and he gave him Geiros. He said, yeah, I'll accept you. You can take just Torah Shebiksav, no problem. How could he do that? We'll see in a minute. Yom Kama, on the first day of the lessons that he was going to teach him, Omar Lo, he said to him, Aleph Beis Gimel Dalet. Hillel said to the prospective Ger, he pointed to Aleph, he points at an Aleph, and he said, this is an Aleph. He points at the Beis, he said, this is a Beis. Points at the Gimel, he said, this is a Gimel. Points at the Dalet, he said, this is a Dalet. And he said, go home and chazer over today's lesson. I want you to review what I taught you today. L'mochar apichle. The next day, when the Ger came back for the second lesson, Hillel points to the Aleph and he says, Daled. He points to the Beis, he says, Gimel. He points to the Gimel, he says, Beis. He points to the Dalet and he says, Aleph. Just the opposite. He points to, it says just the opposite, right? So he said, and what did the Ger say? The Ger says, Omalei, v'esmol lo amata li hochi. But wait a minute, you told me yesterday, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet. Today you're telling me Dalet, Gimel, Beis, Aleph? What's going on over here? Omalei, So Hillel says to him, Lav olai didi kosamchis. Wait a minute. How do you know I was right yesterday? You're relying on my Baal Peh telling you that this is what the Ksav is about. Caught dead to rights. And he understood completely. We don't know what an Aleph or a Beis or a Gimel or a Dalet is without Torah Shebal Peh. How do we know? Our Mora, our teacher, our Rebbe, whatever you had in kindergarten, first, second, third grade, this is an Aleph. You said, okay, it's an Aleph. So the whole transmission is all Baal Peh. Everything is really Baal Peh. And the Ksav and the Baal Peh work in such a way that it's impossible to get past Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet if you don't recognize that the authenticity of Torah Shebeksav is totally dependent upon your acceptance of Torah Shebal Peh. And Chazal recognized and understood this. Hashem understood this, and He gave us a Torah Shebeksav, which, by the way, you take a Torah Shebeksav, you take the written law, and you start analyzing simple things. You take the 10 Commandments, for instance. There's a fascinating question about the first of the Aseres Hadivros. What is the first commandment? What is it? Anochi Hashem Elokecha. So what's the commandment? I don't see a commandment there. What's the first? I don't see anything. I don't hear about it. And go to the last one. Lo sachmod. Lo sesave. Don't covet or desire someone else's whatever. What does that mean? I'm not allowed to have feelings? I'm not allowed to say, oh, boy, what's this thing that's going on in India? The guy has a $1 billion watch, or what was it, $1 million, or something like that? Let me see that watch. A human being can't take a look at it. You can't have feelings. Is that what it means? And if you go through the Gemara on this, you find out it's not that at all. It has to do with doing something that demonstrates that you're going to get that thing. You know, the Gemara says, and it's halachically brought down, that if a person said, I want to buy a house, and the other person said, no, it's not for sale. He said, but I want that house. What's the house? What's the market value on that house? Oh, the market value on that house. Well, it depends where it is. I suppose if it's in Rechavia or Baka, it's probably worth a lot more than if it's in one of the shtachim. But all right, so a person says, oh, the house is worth $2 million. He says, I'll give you $10 million. You say, you're going to give me $10 million? But I don't really want to sell it. Oh, come on, I'll give you 10, I'll give you 12, I'll give you 15, 20. And you agree to 20 million. Do you know that lahalacha, you have transgressed lo sachmod, even though you paid for it with good money? So you don't even know what lo sachmod means. We don't know what Anochi Hashem Elokecha means. We really don't even know how to translate Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. If we don't go to the Mefarshim, it's hard to explain. Wait a minute, Shema Yisrael, hear, O Israel, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem is our God, right? Wait a minute, I just gave you two names, Hashem and Elokeinu. Hashem Echad, now you're telling me it's one? You just gave me two different names. What does that mean? And you said Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu. Which one is it, Hashem or Elokeinu? Hashem Echad. Oh, now, no, it's not Elokeinu, it's only Echad, Hashem. How do you translate Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad? And this is a dilemma that if you really thought about it, you're going to wonder, what am I davening every single day? I say Shema, I cover my eyes, I Shema Yisrael, I take the dalet, I stretch out the dalet. By the way, mentioning the dalet, I just throw out last week's Sergio, if you remember in Kisisa, it says, Lo shishtachavel el acher. What's unusual about the word acher? It's got a large resh at the end of the word. Aleph ches resh, a large resh, right? And echad, how do you spell echad? Aleph ches, and the dalet is large, right? How come the dalet is large by echad, and the resh is large by acher? So I once heard a drasha. This goes back more than 60 years ago. I heard a drasha from a rabbi at a bar mitzvah. And he said, and it was the I don't know which Sedra it was, but he said this particular thing. He said, you know what the difference between Echad and Acher is? I'll tell you the difference. A Dalid is straight and perpendicular, exactly. A Reish is a little bit bent. Says, you know what happens when you take Hashem Echad and you start bending it a little bit, and you start playing around with the one and only God, it becomes El Acher. That's why there is a large Reish and a large Dalet. You gotta know the difference. Now this is Torah Shebal Peh, but it's in the Torah Shebiksav. And consequently, when it comes to Pirkei Avos, and it's telling us, Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai, Umisora Yoshua, it's because the tradition of Klal Yisrael is exact and is passed down from generation to generation to generation, exactly the way it always was. So the Rambam, when he gives us that information at the beginning of Pirkei Avos, and he says that the first reason is Kedei Lahodia, that the Kabbalah is emes unechona, it's crucial to learn Pirkei Avos because of that reason. And the second reason he gives, and we're now going to focus on another point, V'ha'inyan hasheni is shehu rotze lizkar b'mesechta zu musar kol chacham min hachachamim, because he wants to let us know what the literally musar misora, but it also means, of course, instruction in terms of, like Rabbi Yisrael Salanta Zechron Levracha said, he was the Av of the Bali Musar, and he said Musar is crucial to learn because when you study the midos, tovos, that the Gedolim have, that will help us understand what we should emulate and how we should behave. And it's specifically the Chachamim that bear this Mesorah, because they're the ones who have to be the most ethical of all the people. Because if they are ethical and they are doing the right thing, and we will emulate them, we in turn will copy that particular point. The Ksav Kabbalah brings down that Rabbi Yisrael Salanta was once asked, why does he emphasize Musar so much? Why are you emphasizing the teaching of Musar? Why don't you emphasize the teaching of Halacha, or the teaching of the Perish of the Chumash, or the Mishnah? Why are you emphasizing Musar so much? So Yisrael Salanta said, I'll tell you. A person once came to me, and he said to me, you know, Rebbe, I only have 15 minutes a day to learn. What should I learn in those 15 minutes? Should I learn Chumash? Should I learn Novi? Should I learn Halacha? Should I learn Mishnayos? Should I learn Medrash? What should I learn? So Rabbi Yisrael Salanta says, if you only have 15 minutes a day, learn Musar. He says, Musar? You want me to learn Musar if I only have 15 minutes a day? What about all the other things that are important? He said, if you start learning Musar, you're going to find out you have more than 15 minutes a day. That's why. So it's not so pashut that the Musar is not of tremendous value. It has tremendous value because the Mesorah and the Musar, which brings out the right midos, that is what is absolutely crucial. I learned in the yeshiva at the First Yerushalayim, and of course I was exposed to Rav Moshe Zatzal and to his son Reb David Zatzal. And Reb David Feinstein, when he was asked numerous times by people, I'm looking for a shidduch for my daughter or for my son, either whatever it was. What should I look for in the prospective mate? And Reb David invariably answered, find someone with good midos. Because that is going to make a successful marriage. More important than anything else, you have to see the person's midos. And one of the stories that is told over in the Sefer that they wrote about Reb David, I don't even call it a book. It's not even a biography. It's mamish a Sefer, because when you read it, and you read the kind of person he was and how he dealt with people, you get the picture. So there was one particular fellow who was very, very tall. He was very tall. And he was very shidduch. A girl with wonderful midos, all the alamilas, you really should consider this shidduch. And he said, okay, I'll give it a date. He went out on a date, he came back the next day and he said, this is not for me. He's 6'4", she's 5'4". That's still not bad, 5'4", but he's 6'4". He said, she's too short for me. It's not for me. It's not for me. So he came back to Reb David, he said, Rebbe, should I go out again? He said, absolutely. Give it another chance. He went out again, and again, and again, and finally they got engaged. So Reb David said to him, you know, what happened? He said, well, I'll tell you, after getting to know the person, I didn't notice the height difference because the midos was so good that everything else paled by comparison. It doesn't matter. And by the way, you should know something. Reb Moshe Zatzal was not a very tall man. Reb Moshe was very short. He was about 5'1", maybe 5'2", maybe. I don't think so. He was much shorter than me. All right, and his wife was pretty tall. She was about 5'6", 5'7". She was pretty tall. There was no problem there whatsoever. Because the midos are what brought out who the people were. And so the Rambam is saying that the second reason why you absolutely must learn about the midos of the AVOS, and he calls the AVOS, he brings down the pasuk, famous pasuk by Elisha, when Eliyahu Hanavi went up to Shamayim, it says that Elisha cried out, Avi, Avi, Rechev Yisrael. Because he recognized that the teachings that came to him from Eliyahu Hanavi were the same as the teachings as if they were given from a father. And the leaders of the Jewish people are our avos, Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. Why do we study almost 2,000 years of history prior to Klal Yisrael becoming a nation? When we left Egypt in 2448, it's 2,500 years, because Bereshis is the avos. It teaches us what the fathers did and that we are the children. And consequently, the study of avos, according to the Rambam, is actually very, very important. He said, by the pasuk of Avi, Avi, al Eliyahu Hanavi zochar latov, v'chein nikru hatalmidim bonim. And the children are called banim. The students are called banim. We have to look at our children, our students, as if they are banim. They're our kids, because that's the future of Klal Yisrael. And consequently, Pirkei Avos is crucial and absolutely valuable in the longest term possible, and the values that, of course, come from Pirkei Avos. Now, if we take a look at the beginning of Pirkei Avos, every one of us knows what's my time limit here? 10? 10. 10. Okay. So if you take a look at in any siddur, in any sefer quoting of Pirkei Avos, you're going to find that Pirkei Avos does not start with Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai. There's a little bit something right before that in every edition, and that's a Mishnah that comes from Daf Tzadik and Sanhedrin, the famous introduction of Agodas Chelek, the Perek in Sanhedrin that's called Chelek. What's Chelek? So we start out by saying Kol Yisrael Yesh Lahem Chelek Liolam Haba. All of the Jewish people have a share in the world to come. Amen. And they quote the pasuk in Yeshaya. This is part of the Haftorah of Parshas Kisavo at the end. It says, Shenemar va'amech kulam tzadikim. Your nation, all of them are righteous. All the Jewish people are righteous. And how do we know that all the Jewish people are righteous? Because the pasuk says so. Shenemar va'amech kulam tzadikim la'olam yishu oretz. Your nation is all tzaddikim, they shall forever inherit the land. And of course, it's talking about the land of Eretz Yisrael. La'olam yishu oretz. Neitzer mata'ai, they are the formation of my planting, Maaseh Yodai, the work of my hands, lehispoer, that I may be glorified, says Hashem. That's the pasuk in Yeshaya. And the pasuk in Yeshaya is introducing Pirkei Avos. Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek le'olam haba. All the Jewish people have a share in the world to come. Shenemar, v'amech kulam tzadikim, le'olam yeshu oretz, neitzer ma'ato'ai, Maaseh Yodai lehispoer. What do you mean, Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek le'olam haba? Why are we starting off this very powerful Masechta of Masechta Avos, which has such deep teachings and ethical values? Why are we starting out with the statement of Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek le'olam haba? All of Israel, every single member of Klal Yisrael, yesh lahem chelek le'olam haba. What's the reason we start with that? So there are a number of different mefarshim that speak about this particular aspect of why it says Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelek le'olam haba. You know how difficult it is to take Pirkei Avos, study it, and then practice it? It's a challenge. It's a tremendous challenge. And our Chazal point out that traditionally, in the history of Klal Yisrael, Masechta Avos was always learned between Pesach and Shavuos. We've extended that learning to go well past Shavuos, through the entire summer. But basically, Pirkei Avos was always learned between Pesach and Shavuos. What's the reason for that? Why do we learn it between Pesach and Shavuos? So there are a number of reasons. Number one, we have to be aware that from the time of the advent of the Nisim and the flows that took place in Chodesh Nisan, in Pesach, until 49 days later, when we accepted the Torah and received it from Hashem al Har Sinai, we had to go and traverse a tremendous wide chasm in terms of our ethical and mitzvah observance. We started out as a nation that was unfortunately boorish. You know, Chazal tell us that on Pesach, right before we left, we had sunken down, the amazing medrash, sunken down to the 49th level of Tumah. Tumah! Doesn't just say 49th level of not so nice. Mamish Tumah. And by Shavuos, Har Sinai, all of a sudden we're whoa, number one. So this is a period of time, Al Chazal tell us, in which it's good to study Pirkei Avos, because you got to get from there to there. And from Pesach to Shavuos is a time to get from the lowest to the highest. But there's another reason. And we can relate to this. Of course, I think personally, when I used to teach this in our shul in Borough Park, you know, so we lived in a cooler climate, you might say. You know, even when it gets cold over here, it doesn't get to 10 degrees. But, you know, I'm talking about 10 degrees Fahrenheit, okay, which is way below, you know, 30, what is it, 32? So it was 0 degrees Celsius, so it's a lot minus. So it's really, really cold. And people hibernate. You don't get together too much. But when it comes Pesach time and it gets nice, people start going out. So you're mingling more with people. And you're meeting friends. And not only are you meeting friends, but the world begins to blossom out. And as our Chazal say, with the Yetzer Hara for all manner of illicit activities. Although in America, I don't think the seasonal makes a difference. But the fact is, there is this penchant to go to the beach and, you know, whatever it is. And our Chazal wanted us to be aware that when we study Pirkei Avos, that what we've got to do is we have to do everything we can to try to sort of limit it. And it's a good idea to start learning these values. Now, it has nothing to do only with tznius. It has to do with human interactions. When people are getting together more and they're relating to each other, it's amazing how many small idiosyncrasies that are involved in our human interactions pop up, and we say, oh, I can't deal with this guy. It's just too much. And along comes a weekly study of Pirkei Avos, and it sort of zaps it to you and lets you know, well, now's a good time to practice those midos that are so crucial for human interaction and for making OUisrael into one solid unit, and not to let the fragmentation of personalities get in the way. And it's amazing. It's amazing how different people could be, and how much musar of a positive sort that we need. Here's an example. Did you ever think to yourself, I'm living in Tufshin Pei Daled, 5784, 5,784 years since the world was created. I'm 3,000 years away from the era of Moshe Rabbeinu and others. And over the centuries, there have been the greatest of Gedolim, Tanoim, Amoraim, Rishonim, Acharonim. Let's use stuff from our own history. People could ask and say, I don't understand. The Vilna Gaon was not able to bring Mashiach. Didn't happen. It didn't come. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter wasn't able to bring Mashiach. And in our generations, Rav Moshe couldn't bring Mashiach, Rav Shach couldn't bring Mashiach, Rav Kook couldn't bring Mashiach. Well, if they couldn't do it, I'm going to do it. In my generation, the Hamon Am, every individual, every one of us could say to ourselves, they couldn't do it, and you're telling me I should do it? I once took some students to see Reb David Feinstein. We went to a shiur on Friday, and we went, and one of them said, I'm going to Eretz Yisrael next year to learn for a year in Eretz Yisrael. And he said, can I have a bracha? So Reb David took his hand, shook his hand, and said, go learn and bring Mashiach. The guy's still learning, but didn't bring Mashiach yet. So we could say to ourselves, I don't understand. None of these greats, none of the Gdolim, none of the powerhouses of the past years were able to bring Mashiach, and you're telling me that I could bring Mashiach? You're telling me that if I daven properly, and if I relate to my fellow human being properly, and I try to keep the mitzvahs, all of a sudden this generation is going to be able to bring Mashiach? How's it possible? It's not going to happen. So I was sitting in shul yesterday. I was actually standing in shul, but I was standing in shul, and the guy in front of me is having a conversation after davening with a fellow next to him, and he said, in my lifetime, it's not going to happen. I'm not going to see Mashiach. I have no hope that I'm going to see Mashiach. And I was thinking to myself, you're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to say that. That's not so. I am waiting that every single day he could come. Animam and B'munah Shleim. When you say Animam and B'munah Shleim, B'viyas HaMashiach, even though he's taking so long, I'm going to wait for him. He can really come at any time. When we say that, are we saying B'munah Shleim? Do we really mean it? And I think that what we have to do over here is recognize that when Chazal introduced Pirkei Avot with the statement, Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelik li'olam haba, all of the Jewish people have a share in the world to come, and that's the way we introduce Pirkei Avot. It's because they're letting us know that we can bring Mashiach, even though the others did not. What did the Gemara say? The Gemara said, Shimshon bedoro, Kishmuel bedoro. Even though there was a tremendous difference between the leadership of Shmuel and Avi and Shimshon, but each one in his generation is as great as the previous generation. And even though there are giants that preceded us, we're standing on their shoulders. And we are standing there because we are learning Pirkei Avos just as our Chazal taught us. And when we learn that and we inculcate those ethical values, we recognize the value of each and every individual. And it's interesting that the ethical values that Pirkei Avos talks about is not talking only to the Gedolim. On the contrary, it's talking to the Hamon Am, to every one of us. Now, of course, we shouldn't go around thinking to ourselves, I'm not important and I'm not valuable. But at the same time, we have to look at the value of each and every one of us. The Gemara says that a person is supposed to walk around thinking, Bishvili nivra ha'olam. Because of me, the world was created. Now, that's a pretty interesting thing. I can just picture somebody getting up and standing on the corner of King George and Jaffa Road, and he's standing up on a soapbox. He says, everybody pay attention, please. I want you to hear this unbelievable thing. Bishvili nivra ha'olam. They're going to lock him up.
I think there is a guy that does that.
Probably so. Probably so. Probably so. Right. Right. And on the other hand, Avraham Avinu said, "V'anochi ofa v'efer." I'm nothing but dust and ashes. You know? So how do we balance that? By studying Pirkei Avos. We walk around with all these ethical values in our hands, recognizing that I am valuable. And when we start out with Pirkei Avos and we say, Kol Yisrael yesh lehem chelik le'olam haba, we're saying that I am part of that Kol Yisrael. And that even though I may not be, I'm definitely not one of the Gedolei Hador, but I have just as much power and just as much of a tafkid, just as much of responsibility to bring Mashiach in our time. And it's possible, and we can do it. And we're supposed to say that to ourselves. And that's why Pirkei Avos has to start with the concept of Kol Yisrael yesh lehem chelik le'olam haba. Because we study it, and we hopefully improve one iota, one little bit. We get a small fraction each time. We get one day better. The real job and the real value that Pirkei Avos has for us is to teach us that we don't have to be the Rosh Av Bezdin. We don't have to be the greatest Talmud Chacham. We don't have to be the most midos-filled person. But what we do need to do is to get a little bit better and to grow in some small way each time we face another Yom Kippur. And we say to ourselves, okay, I used to have ABC as a not such good midah, but in the 60 years since that time, I've managed to get a hold of one and make it a little bit better, and to improve somewhat, because Kol Yisrael yesh lehem chelik le'olam haba, all the Jewish people, every single one, from what we would consider the most unaffiliated to the most learned, each and every one has a chelik in olam haba, and we have to think about the fact that when we inculcate that within our psyche, that we are fulfilling what Chazal wanted us to get when they taught us the beginning of Pirkei Avos. So more or less, the introduction, which we'll spend some more time on in the future, because I have to really crunch that particular introduction to Pirkei Avos to be able to understand what it means when it says you are the branch of my planting. Klal Yisrael is the branch of the planting. And you can just imagine what Chazal meant when they said that you are the branch of my planting. There's so much going on in that particular statement. So this is the introduction. This is the basic introduction. It's Miyotz Hashem. I hope to delve a little bit more into. I suppose if there's any, we'll spend 2 or 3 minutes. If there's any questions or comments on the shir, anybody have anything? Yes, please.
Why, if the ethics is so important, why is it at the end of the zikr, not at the beginning of the zikr?
Okay, so that's a good question. Nizikin and the Shas and the Mishnayos are there to tell us law. And so the study of law is of crucial importance in order for us to fulfill the responsibility the Jewish people have. you would think that law doesn't have any ethical requirement, because if you go to a judge, because of a transgression in law, he's not going to necessarily give you a lecture on ethical values. He's going to state the law, and you're not going to get put in jail for ethical value of a high order. But Chazal wanted us to know that it's just as much a law as far as Klal Yisrael is concerned as the nitty-gritty of what you're dealing with. When you deal, I'll give you an example. I recently sold a house, okay? Because Hashem gave me a gift about 50 years ago, and the gift wasn't only my wife, but she bought a house for us. I didn't know about it. I came home from work. She says, "Hey, Mazel tov, I bought a house." She really did. It was a riot. It's the truth. Anyway, so I bought a house, and as a Rebbe in yeshiva, I don't know if you're aware of this. No complaints over here. But if you're a Rebbe in yeshiva, it's not the high tier salary scale, But my wife bought a house. So you hold on to a house in Borough Park for 50 years, you can retire. right? So I had to sell the house. So I had an offer for one particular fellow for pretty close to what I wanted. It wasn't exactly what I wanted, it was close. And I said, it sounds good. I think I'll accept that offer. Let me think about it for a day. Okay? The next door neighbor heard, which I already had offered to him for much better price, but he didn't want it. So Bar Mitzvah was out of the picture. He called me back and said, "I heard you got close to what you want. I'll beat it." Does he really want it? I said, "I'm sorry. I already told the person that I was going to give it to him." And I did that based on a shayla that I asked. Because I already sort of gave my word. So now the nitty-gritty of the law was there, but the ethical value kicked in. So it wasn't what I wanted, but that's the way we have to deal. It came after the law itself. And that's why perhaps the Pirkei Avot, the ethics, kick in at that point, possibly.
Plus you see the guy from transgressing on Lo Tachmod.
No, he didn't have Lo Sachmet, but he just thought he's going to get it for a real song, but it didn't happen. I wish him all the best. Baruch Hashem. Okay.
Bob, I have a question. Yesterday I met a group of the young Jewish girls or ladies who came here for study for the gap year.
Yeah.
And I'm also going to April for the vacation. And I have to come back here again. The key question is this one. With the war and anti-Semitism is growing up, my life is important as much others' life. Israel, Jew as a nation, us, we have a right to defend our nation. But the world couldn't see that value. What is Torah teaching how we handle those people who cannot see our life is precious as much like theirs?
I'm not qualified to deal with that world-class question. I have no intention, no desire to be the Prime Minister of the State of Israel.
I understand.
or to be the United Nations representative.
Although I have ambition,
but I think you're asking a powerful question, and I think we have to start with
next class you can teach, perhaps.
Okay, thank you. Have a very wonderful day.